Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Hello, X. I have lurked here for some time. It's no secret that this place has gone downhill recently. All of it has become just too generic, repeating the same stupid generals and the same 5-10 threads recycled every other day, with the occasional genuine post that comes in once in a month. Gang stalking, I am enlightened, YouTube slop, succubus, etc. So I'm here making this post intending to do my part, and hopefully that could spark some change. With that boring intro out of the way, you all have heard about City of the Living Dead, black magic, jinn, talismans, and all kinds of spiritual and magical stuff. In Iraq, where I am from, we have the world's largest cemetery, Wadi al-Salam, or the Valley of Peace, located in Najaf. It's a massive cemetery that covers more than 6 square kilometers. It's filled with dead people, wars, religious killings, infants and soldiers. Even the surrounding streets are said to have people buried beneath them, from the 90s Saddam wars, American invasion. The militias all fought and died around that place. The dead people are all around, literally. It has been there for maybe 1,000 years, if not more, probably more. The first who was buried there is said to be Imam Ali, the Prophet's cousin. It's said it was given to him in ancient times by the Prophet Abraham as a piece of heaven, which is why the Shia majority in the South, even non-Shia but mostly Shia, bury their dead in that cemetery. Because they believe that Ali has taken a vow to protect all those buried near him from the tortures of the afterlife, also widely believed that Ali will take those buried near him to heaven in the end times by repenting their sins. However, the stories about jinn and black magic that get buried there are numerous. All kinds of outrageous and paranormal things happen there. The graveyard keepers who take care of the newly deceased tell all kinds of tales. Jinn that appear at night. Moving candles dimly lit, witches and vile individuals who practice magic come at night and bury dolls with talismans inscribed on them. They bury it usually between 2 graves at night for the talisman to take effect. A couple of interesting tales I got: the graveyard keepers wash the dead with water and soap. This soap is heavily sought after. The magician buys these soaps from the keepers for outrageous amounts, more than $1,000 for just a piece of soap. Additionally, most of the time the keepers will never sell these soaps, regardless how much you offer them. They will also threaten you if you ask them to sell it, because they know for a fact it will be used for ill intentions. What's special about the soap? It said this soap will be pure filth or pure sin, because it carries all the sins of the diseased individual that got cleansed with it, which makes it the best ingredient for the purest form of evil magic. Another tale about an old lady. It's somewhat of a folklorish tale about a woman that died, and her son was trying to bury her. She is known to be a witch. She practiced magic, and when her son tried to bury her 2 or 3 times, the car that was going to transport her to the Valley of Peace crashed, and some people involved died. The son in the end decided to carry her mother on his back and take her by himself at night, without anyone else involved. He managed to get her to a grave that he dug at night and buried her there. While he was going back, he got hit by a car and died shortly after. The graveyard keepers came to this freshly dug grave the next day and didn't know who it was for. It was an unnamed grave in a random place. Some time passed and other people were meant to be buried near that unnamed grave. They buried people near that grave, and something unnerving kept happening. The people buried near that unnamed grave were dug up and completely butchered and massacred, and the pieces were thrown under in the grave. The freshly buried people are not safe in their coffin. Also, the magicians dig those graves out and pull their brains, heart, and different organs to use them for black magic.
Your story was a good start about genuine topics. The story is about a massive cemetery. Then your talk about dolls is total nonsense. This made it sound not any different than some guy who heard word magic and now is all over speaking how creepy it is creepy, and how to do the magic. From what I read, there is some understanding of how things work, like making a ritual with soap or any object. If you had genuine stories from the cemetery and posted them, this would be more interesting. Or you speak about stories we don't hear in the West and you can provide some sense to them. So far it is good, and I will follow the development of your post.
I mean, the stories I heard are all darkish in nature, but the sheer size of the thing is unfathomably huge. You could easily get lost there. It's a whole city of dead people, and the amount of demand for new graveland is immense. The people are usually now buried in corridors, large underground spaces that fill 20 to 50 bodies. And these empty spaces with no life usually attract the spirits and jinn from other worlds. I personally never interacted with a spiritual or a practitioner, but they do bury their spells between graves as they have caught some of them in the act. Why they bury it near graves specifically is out of my knowledge. They also rob dead people of their organ meat as it can be used for specific dark rituals. Those practitioners allegedly have some power over a group of jinns, and they aid them in these rituals. The practitioner demands are either money, or more often than not, certain demands from the woman involved. Some people talk about losing sanity or never being able to marry or getting deathly sick due to these spells. I am not from Najaf, so everything I heard about the place and the people involved is just folklore from one guy to another.
He isn't buried in the shrine of Najaf? I've heard stories about corpses of people often appearing there to get buried, but the rest is new to me.
Well, yeah, but the shrine is also vaguely speaking in the vicinity of the cemetery, so it's considered as a singular place.
Why do some of the buildings look like houses? How long ago did this start? Do they know where Imam Ali's grave is located? From my readings, they have funeral rituals the same, like in the West, but is more spiritual inclined, from what Wiki says.
Each tribe and family likes to add their own architecture to the grave to make it more unique to them, so they don't get lost in uniformity, since the graves can easily get mixed up if they all look the same. The graveyard has been here for a while, probably more than 1,000 years. Imam Ali is supposedly buried in his infamous shrine in Najaf, where he was buried after being stabbed by an assassin while he was in his mosque praying. Yeah, the rituals are pretty similar, though the Sunnis don't really like this a lot. They criticize it as a form of idolatry, so they prohibit having graves that even have any kind of grave markings and building blocks that rise above the ground level. That's why you frequently see ISIS members destroying graves and holy places or cultural sites. They disdain these aspects as a form of shirk.
I was posted in Firebase Anaconda during my deployment in Iraq. I was one of 24 soldiers who manned one of 4 entrances into our base. We covered the north entrance where locals would enter and go through our security scanner, be checked for illegal substances, and be routinely verified by our canine division. We came across 80 locals who worked in our base on a daily basis, half who presented goods in our flea markets for sale at the bazaar, and the other half who worked our construction yard doing manual labor and earning American dollars, since Iraq's economy was run by our dollar currency. I had grown fond of many of the Iraq locals during my deployment, and began to grow interested in their culture, and respected them as equals. During the end of my tour, I noticed that many of the workers had perished because Al-Qaeda spies would denounce their family and murder them when they had exited our base for aiding us and taking American money as a form of payment. We had a strict procedure of allowing locals inside the base. Each person was assigned a military ID card which had their picture, date of birth, and microchip attached to the card. After they are scanned into our system, they go through the X-ray machines to see if they are smuggling any items inside the base. During my last 2 weeks, something insane happened that was recorded on our reports that raised eyebrows across our company, and was the ghost story of the year. One of my older locals, Hazim, that I generally talk to on a daily basis, came in through the X-ray but was acting very odd and pale. For the first time in months, he didn't speak to or acknowledge me. He looked sad and uncomfortable, so I left him alone. I assumed it was a death in the family or something terrible had happened. I left him alone as he turned in his badge to enter the base. We did a recount on the badge IDs to make sure all the locals were accounted for and that the badges matched the correct number of people. By the end of the day's work period, the same crowd shuffled through the X-ray machines, picked up their IDs, and made their way back home to their own villages. I noticed that Hazim's badge was still hanging on our wall and still active in our base according to our system. I quickly called the construction yard and alerted them that we have a local that may have been left behind in the latrines or possibly wandered off the working area. They double-checked their cameras and said all individuals signed in have been signed out and that their records were on spot. Our platoon sergeant was worried that we might have allowed him inside the confines of the base without checking him through the system. We did a thorough manhunt for him, but nothing came up. The base was put on alert and the interpreters were notified of the situation, asking individuals to help locate Hazim. That morning, we checked in all the normal locals who were working and noticed that Hazim did not return, so we marked him MIA in our records. Later that afternoon, his wife and son came up to our control point with a cart. She was explaining to the interpreter what happened. The interpreter was pale and sweating as if he'd seen a ghost. He reluctantly turned to me and attempted to collect himself. Hazim was killed yesterday morning by an insurgent for working for the U.S. He was shot to death around 7 a.m. During that time frame, his family was held hostage as they were being questioned by the terrorists as to who else had been working with him. Hazim was wrapped up inside the cart, his body cleaned and ready to be buried. We had mortuary affairs come to identify the body. Still crying and mourning, the wife handed me his badge that was stained with his blood. I exclaimed, "That's impossible," as I knew we already had that badge inside the office. I ran in confusion to prove to myself that a duplicate must have been made, and to my astonishment there was no badge on the wall. I checked the computers. There was also no log of him entering the base on file, and I was extremely pissed and thought that someone was playing a sick joke on me. I told the interpreter that we all saw him enter the base and that he gave us the ID. He replied that it wasn't possible since he had been dead since the morning of that day. Puzzled and confused, I demanded to check the video recordings of the previous day to counter-argue that we were right. The video recording captured Hazim entering the building and scanning through the X-ray captured on video, and as he got off the X-ray machine, he vanished as he started to remove his badge. We watched it over and over again in disbelief, because that is physical evidence that he was there and everyone saw him. His wife, watching the video, continued to cry as she acknowledged his appearance in the video. Our company commander had us destroy the video as it was in bad taste and morbid to release something like that on YouTube, without facing UCMJ charges for uploading confidential footage. He was buried the same day with all his relatives at his village. His co-worker came up to me and explained that Hazim had been secretly putting aside money hidden somewhere in the base and had kept it away from the Taliban, preventing them from robbing him, and instructed his friend to give the funds to his family upon the possibility of his death. His co-worker explained to me, even in death, his loyalty to his family is bound by his soul, and his love to ensure that they are taken care of. In a span of a year, Hazim had saved $8,000, which was more than enough for his family to live off of for the next 10 years.
During my first deployment in 2004, I was stationed at Camp Anaconda, pretty much in the heart of Iraq. After my unit had settled in, we were given the unfortunate news that we would be relocated to northern Iraq to FOB, Forward Operating Base, Endurance. This was terrible news considering we had gotten used to the swimming pool and cable television Anaconda had provided. Endurance was no more than a few tents and old airplane hangars. For those unfamiliar with the invasion of Iraq by the U.S. military, we basically took over most of Iraq's military stations and used them ourselves. My unit was given 2 airplane hangars to house our 4 platoons. Outside of my platoon's hangar, there was an old concrete bunker. One way in, one way out, with my unit's generator sitting within 10 feet of the opening, which was a metal blast door. Well, months into my deployment, I became friendly with a female soldier from my company's mechanics platoon. We needed a private place to go as the relationship we shared was, although known about, was instructed by our superiors to be kept out of sight, out of mind. Well, we chose the bunker. As we first explored it, the hallway from the blast door slanted downwards for about 20 feet until it came into an open area about 10 feet by 10 feet. Total darkness as it was underground. We would take flashlights and our laptop computers each night down to the bunker and spend the night as I had fashioned a makeshift bed from my unit's supply of lumber. We were an engineering unit. What made the bunker appealing was the early warning system that came with it. The generator which supplied power to the hangar was right outside the blast door. If any curious officer decided to go looking for us in the bunker, when the blast door was opened, the sound from the generator would instantly become almost deafening, and we knew someone had opened it. Enough background. Here's what stopped the bunker trips. Well, about the second night on, Sarah would wake me in the middle of the night telling me she was hearing something inside the bunker with us. At first, I attributed the noise she was hearing to hedgehogs, as that part of Iraq is lousy with them. I shrugged it off until I heard the noise. There was no doubt. They were footsteps. The night before the last night we stayed down there, I awoke to whispering coming from the corner, which was followed by footsteps that approached my side of the bed. I woke Sarah and reluctantly turned my flashlight on, fearing what came next. But there was nothing. No body, no footprints. And worst of all, the blast door was closed just like we left it. The last night started with Sarah warning whatever was down there that we were not in the mood to be messed with, and that we just needed to sleep. We both fell asleep as we reassured the other we were just hearing things. Again that night, Sarah woke me and we sat there in total darkness listening to whispers coming from the corner. 2 different voices, followed by footsteps approaching our bed, and then our bed violently shook for just a couple seconds, and then a tremendous sound as if a metal plate had just been dropped next to the bed. In our panic, it took me a good 45 seconds to locate the flashlight, but once there again, there was nothing with us. No footprints, no evidence of what made the loud crashing sound. That was our last night in that bunker.
I served in the United States Army in the infantry with the 101st Airborne. While I was in active duty, I was deployed to Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. My unit spent most of our time in Mosul, Iraq, in the northern part of the country. Mosul is a very old city. There are sections where you would find holes in the street, and if you looked down into them, you could see where the city had been built upon older cities. During the time of this occurrence, June 2003, we had just dealt with a riot by the local Iraqi people who were upset at the corrupt local police. So to help rectify the problem, we fired or arrested the majority of the police. This meant to keep the police stations in the city secure. We had to then provide security and 24-hour guard on them. My squad had been tasked with a 12-hour nighttime rotation at a certain police station. The station was a 3-story building in a very cramped and tightly condensed area of the city. The street in front of the station was only about a car and half wide, and directly across the street was a mosque with at least 10-foot walls. There were roads on either side of the mosque intersecting into the road in front of the station. Myself and 2 other guys from my squad were sitting on the balcony of the 2nd floor of the station pulling security on our shift. It was sometime in the night. If I had to guess, I would say it was sometime around 2:30. While on guard, we would use the lights on our rifles to illuminate any car that drove by so we could see if there were any sort of weapons in the vehicle and stuff like that. We heard a car driving towards us from one of the side roads on the mosque, so we got ready with our lights to illuminate the car when it came into view. Once we saw the car, we shine our lights into the vehicle, directing the light towards the driver. The driver had a typical reaction to the surefire light, which is blindingly intense, by squinting his eyes and attempting to look away from the light. The passenger had a much different reaction. His eyes seemed to glow with intensity by the light. He stared right back at the light, almost looking through it and at us. It was very eerie. At the time, the best we could describe his eyes were that of a cat in the dark with a flashlight shined in its face. I have never heard of a person's eyes being able to reflect light like that before, or anything you could purchase to do such things, especially in a 2nd or 3rd world country. Well, after I got back to the United States, the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose came out, so my then girlfriend, now wife, and I went to see the movie. I now describe the man's eyes as looking exactly like Emily's did in the barn when she named all the demons which possessed her. I am completely convinced what I saw that night in Iraq was demonic or an individual who was possessed.
The Lantern Man. Mostly known in the Arabian Peninsula but said to have appeared elsewhere. Appears in the night as a light in the distance in the desert or remote areas for travelers and campers and lures them to follow him, only for him to keep getting further away and disappear, then show up at different spots until the person following him is completely lost. There are many sightings of this entity on YouTube, primarily Arabian videos, calling him Abu Fanus. I've seen will-o'-the-wisps before, little glowing orbs of light, often around bogs and marshes. It's usually the gases being oxidized from a dead animal or person's body decaying in the marsh. It probably happens in the desert too, where dead things are laying under the sand. It seems the kind of beings seen in deserts are usually especially terrifying and ominous. Whenever I hear people describe encountering phenomena in the desert, they always seem to be negative entities.
It was at Forward Operating Base Warhorse 2005, where I began with KBR as a ROW-PU reverse osmosis water purification unit operator. I worked the night shift for a while, by myself, as there were only 3 of us at the time. We had a generator Connex cargo container converted into an office. I was inside the Connex doing my water testing, and I heard the sound of someone walking on the rocks outside the Connex. I figured that maybe it was security coming by to check on things. I went outside, and there was no one there, and the sound stopped. The moon was bright that night, and there was light shining on the rocks from it. I saw shadows of what looked to be spiked crescents zipping past my feet. I looked up and there was nothing flying around. These things were zipping real fast. Later, I drove back to my LSA to get something. While I was backing up to park, someone started banging on the truck. I stopped immediately thinking that I had hit someone. I got out and looked. No one there. This was about 4 a.m. I went to the bag farm to take more samples and do a general check for water leaks. Between the last outermost bag and the HESCOs, there appeared a small light dancing around. I walked over to that area and it stopped. When the new row PU site was completed, it was customary to get there before breakfast to start the generator, get the AC or heater working in the lab office, and set out a clipboard at the distribution point before walking across the road to the dining facility for breakfast. As I left the office to go, I walked past the ROBU-PU connexes, and I saw a man in a white t-shirt sitting on his heels, leaned up against the connex. I started to go that way to see who it was and what he needed, but when I looked away and back again, he was gone, nowhere in sight. Other people there have had similar experiences. I have never seen a ghost or UFO, so I'm not one to readily believe in these things.
I had a couple of incidents in Iraq. On my first tour, while at Camp Liberty, I was awakened by the sound of my father's voice screaming at me to get up. Get the fuck up! I was fully awake and shaking from his scream when I found myself standing in the middle of my hooch. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of the mortar round exiting the tube and dropped to the floor. The mortar barrage came in, but neither me nor my soldiers were hurt. My father had been dead for 9 years at that point, but had visited me in my dreams many times. He did have a foul mouth, but usually saved the F word for special occasions. I think this one qualified. On my second tour in Iraq, again on Camp Liberty. There were many times I picked up feelings as I went to different places around the camp. Liberty is on the grounds of Saddam's hunting grounds and the place of many atrocities. His sons had their own cabins, which they did as they pleased. I'm also sure that many of my brothers and sisters in arms frequent the camp they came from. It happened on one of the few nights I was actually going to get some real sleep. In the middle of the night, I awoke to the sound of my door opening. I reached for my pistol, and as I turned and saw a soldier in full battle rattle, full vest, helmet, and rifle for the civilian readers, enter my trailer. Oblivious to me, he put his rifle down and sat on the bed. I felt the bed settle under his weight. I pulled my pistol free of my holster and jumped up. He disappeared in front of me as I brought the weapon around on him. I was so shaken, I didn't sleep the rest of the night and shortly returned to work. I was surprised I had not wet my pants. There were a few other nights I had feelings which prevented me from sleeping, but none as vivid as that night. I pray for the souls of those that wander in that faraway place. May God bring them to peace through those that love and miss them.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.